Welcome everyone to our Let Data Drive Your Nonprofit webinar today, and excited to get going. We're going to jump right in here with a polling question right off the bat. So we've got our first question here is: a bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I know there's some people going, what the heck? I did not come here to do homework. But we're gonna jump right in. I like it. People are taking a minute to.
They have to calculate everything.
I've got big expectations for our finance crowd here, so.
All right, since this is the first polling question of the day and we just got started, we'll give it a few more seconds for everyone to answer. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation today, there's a Q&A feature on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You can ask any questions or add any comments. And I think we are at a good point to look at these results. So let's go to the next screen here.
Okay. All right, so looking at the results, it's like some people are just waking up here. So we're showing 7.9% for $1. We've got 50% for 10 cents. I felt like this is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Where should I go with the audience, or should I go with what I think? And then we got 29.5% saying 5 cents. And then 12% are just like, look, it's too early. Okay, so we're gonna go through and we're gonna look at the answer. All right, so the correct answer is 5 cents. So if we take a look at it closely, if the bat costs $1 more than the ball and the total is $1.10, then the ball must cost 5 cents and the bat must cost $1.05. If the ball were to cost 10 cents, then both together would cost $1.20. Okay, so fun little exercise there. So let's take a look at a quote here from Daniel Kahneman from the Wall Street Journal. He says, when people face an uncertain situation, they don't carefully evaluate the information or look up relevant statistics. Instead, their decisions depend on mental shortcuts, which often lead them to make foolish decisions. The shortcuts aren't a faster way of doing the math, they're a way of skipping the math altogether. So, as we look at data and how data affects nonprofits and really all organizations, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can make sure we're doing the math correctly. And as we look at what the numbers tell us about nonprofits and how they are dealing with data, so looking at using data to look at how nonprofits are using data, while nonprofits engage heavily in collecting data, there's room for improvement when it comes to using it to make decisions about programs, services, operations, and fundraising. Excuse me. This missing organizational knowledge is outlined in the chart below. So, we've got a lot of nonprofits are collecting a lot of data. They, 87% think data is at least somewhat important to the organization. 50% aren't quite sure how it can support them, and 31% don't know, what to do with the data that they have, and 25%, collecting data on gifts and initiatives. So as you start to look at these results, it's clear that there's a lot of data out there, but how can we harness that? How can we use that to drive the initiatives and the missions and the outcomes that we're looking for within our nonprofits? So just wanted to use this as an example that there's a lot of data out there, but most organizations feel like maybe they're not using it as well as they can or should be. That being said, I do want to show some examples right off the bat of ways that we see nonprofits using data well. So here's just a couple of examples. We've got fundraising efficiency. So, a chief development officer within an organization might be looking at how are we doing with fundraising. Somebody that, executive director of a board might want to use data to look at how effective are our board members within our nonprofit. We've got from a program officer standpoint, we could have a dashboard around our total budget, expenses, how we're doing towards all of those things, and then a chief development officer would want to look at what's our year-over-year change in donors. So though a lot of nonprofits may be struggling to use data effectively, we are seeing examples and we are helping organizations use data to drive the things forward. So I wanted to start with that just so that I kind of want to make the case here that there are great ways for nonprofits to use data. And now we want to just kind of go through and talk about how we can do that. And that'll be really the focus of our discussion today. So to lay out a bit of an agenda here, we're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to explore how data chaos can impact a nonprofit and talk a little bit about what data chaos means. We're going to analyze the elements of an effective data strategy, explain the function and purpose of a data warehouse, and look at how nonprofits are using data, and then talk about a couple of client stories. So really quick, before we get into introductions, we've got a polling question here again. Which group within your organization do you feel would benefit most from being more data-driven? So looking at your nonprofit and the roles that you have there, where do you see the most opportunity for data to have an impact on your different groups within your nonprofit? Give you a few minutes to answer that. Looks like we had a couple of questions around the polling, questions not popping up. Did we get that resolved? Hopefully.
For anyone that does have troubles with polls, please just let us know. You can email me and I'll put it in the Q&A. They were perfect. Thanks, Mai. You can email myself or Mai and we'll get you guys your credit and go from there. But let's go ahead and look at these results.
Great. Okay. Great. This is what I would expect. Administrative and operations, heavy finance, very high on the list. I mean, honestly, pretty evenly distributed, and I think that speaks to what we've seen. We've seen a lot of projects being driven out of finance. We've seen a lot of desire from administration and operations around kind of mission-driven results and how can we tie our mission to the results that we're looking for. So, and then fundraising and marketing always trying to be more data-driven in the sense of, how can we be more effective in not only looking at who our donors are, staying engaged with them, but how do we provide them with some of those results that show the effectiveness of the donations that they're giving. So great answers there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So really quick introduction. So you've already had 2 polling questions before we introduced ourselves, but my name is Nate Alphen. I am a principal in the data analytics practice here at Eide Bailly. I've been with Eide Bailly about 10 years, and I really work with all of our clients, and more specifically, I work with a lot of our nonprofit clients to help them define and develop data strategies and help them to use data to drive their nonprofits forward. I do a lot of work in the for-profit world as well, but I have quite a bit of experience in the nonprofit world. So I'm based out of Utah, and glad to be with everybody today.
Sean Durkin. I'm a manager in our data analytics practice, focusing on data analytics as well as integrations, based in Denver, Colorado. I've been with the firm for about 1.5 years now, and joined after spending quite a bit of time with funded startups and kind of high growth companies. And the last 1.5 years has been fantastic. So looking forward to talking through some customer case studies and client studies for later on today.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Sean's going to be sharing us a couple of the clients that he's worked with and sharing that with us towards the end of the webinar. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I'm going to give a brief introduction to Eide Bailly. Eide Bailly is a top 20 CPA firm based out of the upper Midwest with clients all across the United States. We are a traditional CPA firm in the sense that we do a lot of compliance, audit and assurance and tax work. We also have a large amount of specialty services that we offer. We've got a lot of those specialty services listed here as well. Financial services, transaction services. We have a large industry presence with industries such as healthcare, government, and specifically nonprofit. We also have a large technology consulting practice, which I work underneath. Sean and I work underneath the umbrella of our specialty services, and then specifically our technology consulting. We have about 50 offices all west of the Mississippi, and about 3,000 staff. So want to talk a little bit about our nonprofit industry group. So this is, we like to say this is how we can help so that you can focus on your mission. A lot of the same services that we mentioned before, but we do a lot of these specifically for our nonprofits. We have around 3,100 nonprofit industry clients that we've served, and about 350 staff that are dedicated to support nonprofits. So it's very important to us, and it's a very important industry group for the firm, and an area where we focus and really enjoy helping our clients there. In terms of technology consulting, so as we think about that subset of our tax and or of our overall firm, technology consulting, we really have 6 main areas that we focus on. We have, as we're going to be talking about today, primarily talking about our data analytics practice. We have a modern workplace group. We do cloud and security, so secure cloud, the modern workplace, really around making the workplace better for the folks that work inside of our organizations. We have an ERP team that focuses on enterprise resource planning software, customer relationship management software, CRM. We have a large practice there. The ERP is primarily focused on NetSuite. The CRM practice is primarily focused on Salesforce. And then we have a process or robotics process automation group that focuses on helping organizations eliminate manual or repetitive tasks. So, and wrapped all around that is kind of our change management. And really the goal here is that we're here to solve our clients' challenges and help them to modernize their business and be more productive and more effective. So looking specifically at our data and analytics practice, we have the following services that you can see here on the slide. We also partner with a lot of software vendors out there to bring the best of breed softwares to our clients. We focus a lot within our group on data warehousing, data science, data strategy, and then KPIs, dashboards. Data strategy is something that's become very popular, and we'll talk about that more as we get into the slides and the content here today. So let's now talk a little bit about how this concept of data chaos and how it can impact. And I think anybody that's worked inside of an organization can appreciate kind of what this might indicate. There are a lot of challenges with data that organizations face. Inaccurate or inconsistent data can be one of the biggest challenges. Trying to understand what is correct. We've got a lot of different sources of information. How can we make sure that the data that we're bringing to the organization is accurate, and is it consistent? And that's one of the challenges that we see. Islands of data in disparate systems is another very common challenge that we see. With the explosion of cloud-based technologies, back 15, 20 years ago, most of our systems might have been installed on a server that was in a closet, somewhere at our organization. Now, nonprofits and other businesses are much more open to adopting cloud type technologies, which just means the data that's core to our organization is now spread across many different systems. And that creates a lot of challenges for organizations trying to get a consistent look at what's happening with their organization. Manual data processes can cause a big challenge for an organization. So you can think of this as, if you've got a process where you have a spreadsheet and you go to a system and you download something and you put it into a spreadsheet, and then you make some manipulations, and then maybe it passes over to somebody else and they make changes. That can be a real challenge to creating good visibility and consistency with data. Rearview mirror versus looking forward really is speaking to this finance operation. We see organizations that spend a lot of time looking back at financial statements to determine how did we do, and then not spending as much time looking forward to say, okay, we know what we did, but how are we going to do in the future? And that can be a big challenge. Lack of timely access to data. We see a lot of times where organizations are waiting until the end of the month to really find out how they did versus really being able to look on more of a daily basis of how we're doing towards achieving our goals and our missions. And then really that time to value, that when we go to look at data, it just takes too long to bring that data to something that I can actually act on or make actionable for my organization. So I want to kind of go through some of those and talk about how you can go about combating that and making some of these challenges become opportunities. All right, so we've got another polling question here. What is the biggest way data chaos has affected your organization?
All right, we will give them a few more moments to answer the question. And as of right now, we do not have any polling questions. I'm sorry, any Q&A questions.
Yeah, questions, okay.
All right, we are almost there. Everyone, just a few more seconds, and then we will show the results.
Okay. I'm getting close.
All right. Are you ready for the results, Nate?
Yes, go ahead.
There we go.
Great. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. This is very, very consistent with what we would normally see. Inaccurate data coming in at the top. Siloed data and manual data processes, very, very common challenges. And I think this is great because we're gonna address some of those and talk about how we can turn some of those challenges into opportunities and bring that data to life. So moving on. So I want to talk for a minute about what it means. We talk about this concept of a data strategy. I want to talk a little bit about what that means and what that needs to look like for most organizations. And when we look at, if we put kind of in context of saying, when we see an organization that we feel like is really doing this well, what are those things that we see happening within that organization? And these are those things. So we see them treating data as an organizational asset. And we see them enabling executive teams with data to make timely and strategic decisions. We see frontline staff that have visibility where they can make good day-to-day decisions. We see them having the discipline to use their data to improve performance. And then, developing deeper understanding of customers and, potentially competitors. And competitors maybe not as much, in the nonprofit space, but, how are they also able to adapt through time, using data to allow the organization to adapt? And so I want to this is, if we're talking about the litmus test to hold up to say, how are we doing as an organization? This is a really good kind of gauge of how you're doing. And so we're going to kind of use this in context of our conversation here. So those of you that are familiar with Gartner, a research type company, they kind of have established some standards and some things that they see in terms of how organizations mature when it comes to business intelligence or data intelligence, as we might say here. And there's a lot of words on this slide, and I don't think we need to focus on all of them, but I think this gives you a good idea of how we see organizations evolving. So oftentimes we see organizations starting with spreadsheets and one-off report requests, and as they start to mature, they start to put a priority on reporting and data. And oftentimes we'll see IT become the first place where we see that start to maybe be incubated or evolved. And then as that organization starts, they start to uncover the kind of the silos of data that they have. And then as you move up and you start to have executives and board members type people become involved in those decisions about what we're doing with our data, that's when we really see the maturity start to evolve. And we start to see technology standards emerge, and we start to put frameworks in place to enable data to be used effectively. The CFO or COO becoming a sponsor of this type of project is really seen as a step towards maturity, as the CFO and the COO tend to be much more focused on the results that need to be driven for the organization versus IT oftentimes being very focused on technology and being interested in bringing in, if I could say it, kind of cool technology, where the CFO and COO become much more interested in how are we going to drive change within the organization. And so that's why we see as the CFO or COO become involved, then that maturity level goes up quite a bit. So this is just and our goal here when we engage with a client is really to help them along this path as they journey towards becoming a more mature organization in terms of how they handle data. So let's talk briefly about the 5 elements that I'll define here, the 5 elements of an effective data strategy. The number one thing is business or organizational requirements. Why do we need data to help us, and how are we going to use data to drive the organization forward? And then the second step is, of course, we've got to go out and determine where is that data. It could be living on a server, it could be living in a system that we're using, it could be in someone's spreadsheet, saved on their computer. It might even be on paper, and so it may not even be digitized yet. So how are we going to gather together this information and turn it into something that we can use? There's going to be a technology and infrastructure phase of this where we have to decide how are we going to really bring this information together, and what are the technology pieces that need to be put in place. And then we've got to make sure we're going to get to insights that are going to be valuable to the organization. The worst thing that can happen is to develop a data strategy that isn't focused on the right insights and the right end results for the organization. And then how is all of this going to affect my people and the processes that we have? We may have to make process changes within the organization to actually make our data strategy work. So I want to go through each of these and just drill down a little bit on what these mean. So as we look at the business requirements portion of this, it's really important to identify a champion and stakeholders that will help us drive this forward. And this is most effectively driven from somebody within the C-suite or the board level of an organization. And then we've got to understand who those subject matter experts are that are going to help us get to that data that we're looking for. Then we need to interview executives and department heads to determine what are the key drivers, what are those key, I'll throw this term out that we'll talk about a little bit later, but what are those key performance indicators? Sometimes you'll hear those called KPIs. What are those key performance indicators that we are going to bring to the surface that we feel like will change the way we operate and will drive us towards our mission and our goals as an organization? And then what are those departmental goals? And then align those KPIs to those departmental goals. And that's a really key portion is it's not just about identifying the KPIs, but how do those align to what the departments are working on? All right. So when we talk about gathering the source data, this can be one of the more challenging and time-consuming aspects of developing a data strategy, is really analyzing how data is gathered and where the data exists. And as I said, this can be spreadsheets. This can be, most often we see it in systems that are being used to run the organization, whether that's an HR system, fundraising platform, depending on the type of nonprofit, it could be something like, in the instance of a low-income housing nonprofit that we've worked with, it could be a property management company, a property management platform. Where is that key information, and how do we get access to that and start to identify that, where that data lives? And then, as I said, how do we get access to that? And then for non-available data, determine how to begin capturing and retaining that data. And again, this kind of goes back to and kind of ties into this idea that in order to really have an effective data strategy, sometimes it involves changing our processes, changing the organizational processes to make sure that we are capturing the information that we need. Then as we talk about technology infrastructure, and I hope, I think sometimes when people see this, they think, wow, this is, getting super technical. This is really guidance that we provide to our clients that help them to stay aligned to the value that they can get from a solution like this. So it's, don't get caught up in the hype and the latest technology, focus on value. It doesn't mean that we can't embrace new technology. We just don't want to get so caught up in it that we don't recognize the value that we can get, and the cost outweighs the value to the organization. One of the really important steps is determining if an operational system can support the reporting needs that you already have. So if you've got a system that you're using to help run the organization that you have, if that system has native reporting, that may meet a lot of the needs that you have. And it's important that you take a look at that and determine if that is the case. If you determine that that's not going to, if a specific system that you use is not going to meet all the reporting needs that you have, how well can your organization support a data warehouse type solution, which we'll talk about in just a moment? And how can we integrate and move data to a data warehouse? And is a cloud solution or an on-premise solution the right choice? And then how will we build reports? So these are all some of the key things to think about as you go down that path. And I think this is one of the most important things to consider as you're developing the data strategy, which is, what are the insights that we're looking for? Reports should make key takeaways easy to spot. As you build out your visualization, as you build out your reports, you want to make this a very easy thing for your end users. Providing something that's a big table of information that maybe to a few very technical people, they understand what those things mean. Those don't often bring a lot of value. So visuals should really tell a story. There should be a plan for how insights can be shared with others. So we've got reports, but how are we going to make those available and accessible? And then good reports should not just show aggregated results, though aggregated results are good. They should also allow for drill down analysis, enable for us to click on a transaction and see the details of those, or click on a number and see those detailed transactions below, is a very important piece. So these are all really important things to consider as you go about developing that strategy. And then when it comes to people and process, these types of initiatives can be very they can be very impactful for an organization, but they can also be very disruptive. How will your organization handle a new data strategy? A lot of things that get disrupted are things that have been happening the same way for many, many years. And you may be going in and introducing new processes and changes to existing processes. And determining how you're going to handle that, what that's going to look like, is going to be very important. Will your people need training around not just the reporting, but how these new processes are going to affect them? And then, should we align analysts to business units, or should this be an IT function? Do you want to have an analyst that lives on the finance team and the administration and organizational team, or do all those folks live in IT and do they just support those groups? These are all really, there's no really right or wrong answer here, but it's important that you take the time to think about how that needs to work. And how will IT support the ongoing needs as you evolve this data strategy? What part will IT play in supporting that and making it a long-term success? Okay, so a polling question: how would you describe your organization's data strategy?
And right now, Nate, we do not have any additional questions in the Q&A.
Right. And if there are questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'd be happy to address those and the best we can.
All right, just a few more seconds, everyone, to answer the polling question, and then we will show results. Almost there.
Great. It's a hard question.
Okay, 10 more seconds, and then we can get over to the results. Everyone who is here for CPE, please make sure you get these questions answered. If you have any problems, please place those issues in the Q&A so we can get them addressed.
I do see one
All
question in Q&A.
Mhm.
What are some of the sources of external data that nonprofits should leverage?
Oh, was Sean getting that one? Oh, he typed it, but if you want to talk about it, you definitely can.
I had just mentioned that, especially during COVID, we saw a lot of external data around healthcare, but really, I think there's a lot of variety within the nonprofit space, and so I thought it depended really on what your mission is and what you're looking for. But yeah, I didn't know if you had any additional context there, Nate.
No, I think that's great. I think a lot of it that we see comes from we see a lot of nonprofits interested in benchmarking against groups of their same in their same focus area, trying to determine how are we doing compared to others, and how are we stacking up against some of the other would just be where federal grants are involved and things like that. How can we pull in information that maybe help us determine how effectively we're using those dollars and things like that. So yeah, I agree with you, Sean. It's going to be pretty specific to the type of nonprofit that you are. But great question.
All right.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, this is good. So we've got kind of a mix of we're getting started, and we're. If I can go back and look at those results real quick again. Yeah, this is good. I think we do see a lot that are getting started, and I think data is one of those typical where I don't know if any organization will ever feel like, hey, we've completely arrived. We're in, as we're kind of seeing in these poll results, but a lot of people that look like they've gone down the path, they're doing a job. But there's always room for improvement. So yeah, these are great. So I want to talk a little bit about the purposes and benefits of a data warehouse and how it can really impact a nonprofit as they are evolving with a data strategy. And I want to introduce, and I guess I always say this, but if you don't remember anything else from this webinar today, maybe you can use this as a way to think about the way that data really moves and is effective in an organization. And I like this analogy, and I use it a lot, but it's an analogy where we talk about data as being kind of like a restaurant. And on one side of a restaurant, we have an area where we bring raw food in, and it's staged and it's kept in a storage area. It is raw, and I like to compare that raw data to the data that we have in our systems, that we have in our transactional systems, or our financial systems. That it's very high quality, but it's very raw and it's uncurated. And so in a restaurant, on one side we've got this, as I said, raw information, and then on the other side of a restaurant you've got this area where people are wanting to come and consume information, and they're wanting to come have a dining experience. And oftentimes what we see is that we see a lot of organizations that for one reason or another are trying to take raw information, and then they're trying to curate that into something that they can use, and the same challenges exist with taking raw data and trying to very quickly and maybe without a lot of skill move that information into something that can be consistent and accurate. That same challenge is what you would see in a restaurant if you did not have a kitchen. Inside the kitchen we have skilled staff who have recipes, and they understand how ingredients need to be brought together and curated. And the same way that process needs to happen within a restaurant is the same way that information, to one degree or another, needs to be happening within an organization. So, though we have a lot of really valuable raw information, we need to have a process for curating that and bringing that forward to where we have groups or individuals within the organization, again, that can now come and help themselves to that information and be able to consume it and have a good, consistent experience with that, and then have that information, be kind of proliferated throughout the organization. So when we talk about this concept of a data warehouse, sometimes people can think that that's really a technical term, and I don't really know what that means. But really, if you think about the data warehouse being the kitchen of your organization from a data perspective, I think sometimes it helps people to understand the importance of that and why it is vital, and why when we go inside of a nonprofit that has a data warehouse, we see that they are much more mature in how they're handling and curating and then consuming data and information. We have a quote from one of our clients, the Goodwill of Colorado, who you'll learn a little more about a little bit later. And they said, we've had appetizers and now the team is ready for a main course. So, sometimes when we see data flowing through without the kitchen, people feel like they're getting little tidbits and they're getting little pieces, but it's not very consistent. The goal would be, if we work towards more of a data warehouse environment, we can create something that is going to meet the needs of the organization in a much more scalable and satisfying and results-driven way. Sean, anything to add there?
Completely agree. That's exactly it. You did a good job of communicating that. So same thing. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but they did have reporting in place, and they saw the value of reporting, and they just needed it in a little more scalable way that was repeatable for the organization.
Great. So as we take this this restaurant analogy that I like to use, and we turn that into more of maybe a technical diagram, this is kind of what that diagram would look like. So within, and these are some of the more common data sources that we've seen within the nonprofits that we've worked with, using Blackbaud, Ulta Pro, Razor's Edge, Social Solutions, some of these, social platforms, some of these, we'll call them CRM or donor relationship management platforms. All of those systems have some level of built-in reporting themselves, but it's hard to create really valuable data and reports from one source of information. As we state here on the left, the best insights usually take data from more than one source. So to create in order to create a data asset, you really have to have the ability to combine information. So if you move from kind of the pantry on the left-hand side, when we talk about the dining room, really we're talking about data visualization. We're talking about, something like a Tableau or a Power BI or even Excel, where the data can then be visualized. But we need this concept of a data warehouse in the middle here to really combine this data together and make it valuable. So, we often talk about consolidate and transform. Consolidate brings data together, and then the transformation step is really all about curation. It's all about applying business rules in a consistent way so that when someone looks at a report, they can have confidence that that data was curated and brought together in the same way that another person who's looking at that same data, that data was brought together the same way, and they can have confidence. And then as a leadership group within the organization, you have confidence to push that data out. Okay. So our last polling question here: who is currently driving the data strategy in your organization? So just trying to get an idea here of how this is working inside some of your nonprofits.
And we don't have any questions in the Q&A. Hold on, let me refresh. Oh, we do.
Yeah. So I'm seeing that question. It says, I've struggled with mapping required data to overall goals and objectives and data to operating results. Unless you know what data is needed and what you have, you cannot draw meaningful insights. That is absolutely correct. And, going back to that, developing a data strategy, that gathering of requirements and interviewing C-suite and departmental heads is one of the most important steps. And so, once you understand what the desired metrics, what they're looking to measure and to drive the organization forward, that next step of going back, if you don't have that mapping between that data and what they're trying to do, be very, very difficult to provide meaningful insights. That's very insightful. Absolutely.
I'd also say that's something I see people question a lot. I was at a Tableau meetup a couple of weeks ago, and same kind of question came up: is how do we make this meaningful within our organization and show that we're driving value?
Yep. That's exactly right. Okay.
All right. We have about 10 more seconds, and then we can go to the results. If you are here for CPE, please make sure you are answering the polling questions so you can get credit. If anyone is having any issues with the polling questions, please state that in the Q&A box so we can get everything situated.
Andy, you're welcome for all the polling questions. We like them.
All right.
Okay, great. Okay, so as we look at this, who's currently driving the data strategy? Administrative and operations, finance. This is great, and we see these are actually, as you remember back to the Gartner slide, these are signs of good maturity going on within the organization as administration and operations and finance kind of take the lead on these. Those are very good groups, as they tend to be very, very results and mission focused and driven parts of the organization. So those are really good signs. Thank you for the participation on that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sean, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the nonprofit things specifically and a couple of client stories. So Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say that those results, they mirror kind of what we've seen out there. A lot of it's finance driven, sometimes IT driven. I do think we are seeing more and more within the marketing, donor relations, and fundraising space as people mature their organization from a data perspective. Well, there's a wide variety of nonprofits out there, and we've worked with quite a few. So there are a lot of different ways that nonprofits are using data. Like I said at the top, membership recruitment, retention, understanding your core members, understanding maybe why they, work with you, why they don't, or why they may move on, and you want to retain those members and engage with the people who are most engaged. Fundraising outreach is interesting because we are working with an organization today where they're a SaaS platform that helps with fundraising and outreach. And what they do is they put together that kind of complete view of who their organization is working with, and understanding how different actions, whether that's an action on the website or an action of someone giving a donation or maybe buying merchandise and things like that, how that might change their approach of how they work with those folks and outreach them. Accounting, reporting, budgeting, forecasting, those are all pretty self-explanatory. We have seen some around grant administration. I haven't seen that widely used, but depending on how the grant is administered, definitely use case there. I would say one of the more common use cases is around board package creation. And I'll touch on this a little bit with Goodwill of Colorado, but everyone has a board package to create. Some have different KPIs and metrics than others. Most times what we see is it's a very manual process. It is a PowerPoint that someone puts together and spends an enormous amount of time on. The data isn't updated on a regular basis. And so whoever that is putting that together, usually someone on the senior finance team, they're spending a lot of time and effort taking data from multiple different sources, putting in maybe a different data from other spreadsheets, and then manually putting all of that into a board package. So automating that, saves a lot of time. It also allows your board to maybe get visibility into that more often, or your executive team to see those numbers more than once a quarter. Retail, we'll touch on that a little bit. And then, a good portion of our nonprofits that we work with are also healthcare organizations. So provider metrics are ones that we see pretty often. And then this is one that came up kind of early in my career here at Eide Bailey, is improving communication with internal and external stakeholders. So we were working with an organization who it was I would say a newer nonprofit, and their stakeholders, some were governmental, some were influential people throughout their state, some were just regular folks who were attached to their mission. And they were raising money to build a brand new building, and then also, work with that building. So as they were maturing, they wanted to make sure that people were communicated effectively, that the types of content and dashboards that they were putting out to the audience and to the state and to the greater folks who were interested in their mission, they wanted to make sure it was as professional as possible. So they worked with us to put together those dashboards to make sure that they were kind of stepping their game up a little bit, and making sure that some of the influential folks throughout their state and who are governmental, who are involved in it, understood kind of what the mission was and where that was all going, and everything was tracked properly, and just improve the communication in general. So those are some of the ones we see most often. And then we'll go into Goodwill of Colorado. So this is a kind of a high-level case study of how we work with them. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with the Goodwill brand. Goodwill of Colorado is actually the 7th largest Goodwill within the United States. And so in 2019, there were 2 separate organizations in Colorado, and they merged. So Denver Goodwill Industries of Denver and Discover Goodwill of Southern and Western Colorado merged in 2019 to create Goodwill of Colorado. So they launched a new e-commerce platform in October of 2020 called goodwillfinds.com. Maybe some of you folks have been on that. That was in conjunction with a couple of other larger Goodwills to make sure that they had an e-commerce platform that made sense for the future, and with the work with folks who you want to outreach on where your members are. And if people want to buy online, you want to make sure you have the right experience for them. So they have almost 5 million in-store purchases in 2022. They have over 3,000 employees serving 63 63 Colorado counties. And then this is where they really can kind of communicate their impact. And this is something that I'm sure everyone has on their website as well. So they help transform the lives of more than 127,000 Coloradans in need. They contribute over $265 million to the economy through the power of work, train and mentor over 26,000 job seekers, and they have 5,500 volunteers who donated over 100,000 hours of work for the nonprofit. So large impact. I'm not expecting everyone. Obviously, I would say they're kind of on the larger side, especially if you look at like the Goodwills, maybe not as nonprofit as large as well. But you can see that they already have information. They've already been collecting a lot of this data. And so when they came to us, they weren't starting from zero. And I'll go to this next slide. They were starting with something. Specifically, they were doing a lot of work within the finance space. And when they merged, they had to think about what systems they had in place. And Goodwill Industries of Denver had probably a little bit more reporting, specifically around Tableau dashboards. And as we talked about earlier, they saw the value of reporting, but they didn't have scalable systems. And like many of you, they had these kind of islands, right? So they have this point of sale system that had all of their data in it that was being used by the retail managers. That wasn't necessarily connected with some of their finance systems and everything else. And so they had a lot of point system reporting. And part of the reason they came to us to work with us, they had some good folks internally, but they were looking for a recommendation of how they can scale this in the future. They had a specific need because they were switching point of sale systems. And because all that historical data was in their previous point of sale system, they were going to lose that unless they moved into a more of a data warehouse approach where they pull all that information into one central location. And they also just wanted to get more people involved. What they were doing currently wasn't as scalable as they were looking for. They were looking for tool recommendations. They were looking for recommendations of how to support this long term. And so that's where we came in. There was also some trust there between us before this project, because when they integrated in 2019, we also helped them with some independent advisory back then to help them best integrate the systems. So when we look at our organizations that we work with, they generally fit into two categories. Some folks ask us to start with this analysis and design, which Nate touched on a little bit earlier, but it's really us interviewing their business leaders, their end users, understanding what reporting they're doing today, what systems they're in, and helping them understand where their pain points are if they haven't identified those, and helping them put together a plan of how to get to where they want to be. So it's aligning their data strategy with the long-term goals of their organization. And ultimately, a lot of this technology we're talking about is very interchangeable. What matters the most is what's going to be the most impactful for the organization, and let's align the technology around that. Specifically with Goodwill, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, you have to think about how you're going to support this infrastructure long-term. So we want to make recommendations that make sense for the organization, generally as technology that you're already using or easy to support, that the team is going to be comfortable with long-term. And so they started with this analysis and design. The other option is somebody who already kind of knows we needed a data warehouse, help us build it, help us get there quicker. But we started with that, and here are some of the examples of kind of that scope of the analysis and design. So we help them document their pain points and put together priorities. We help design the data infrastructure. We look at key reports and KPIs and what people are using today, help them establish some design standards. And some of that could be from a data perspective, but some of that could even be from a dashboarding perspective. You don't want 1,000 different ways to design a dashboard. There are some best practices there, and we help with that. And then the people, process, and technology recommendations. What technology makes sense? What processes need to stay the same? What might need to change? And then how are you going to support this long term? How are you going to roll this out to make sure that people are using it? How are you going to get the rest of the organization trained and up and running on this? So making recommendations about that is equally as important as any of the technology. And this is one of the outputs of a general analysis and design. So this is a priority matrix. And so when we have conversations with the line of business leaders as well as the end users, sometimes the recommendations are, you should be using your current systems better. Sometimes it's a data warehouse, and sometimes it's a mix in between. But what we do is we put this together. And if you see on the left, it's how easy it is to integrate. And when we say integrate, how easy it is to pull the data out of these systems. And then what's the business value? So usually this is a phased approach. No one You don't go from 0 to 100. You usually start somewhere, get people using it, making sure everything's working properly. And so what we think about is, what systems can we pull into this data warehouse that are going to provide the most value and be the easiest to do? And so that's what this is seeing here. And it's very different from each organization. The plot is going to look very different. And then you can see that green highlight. So in the first phase of this, we decided Excel spreadsheets are really important. The old point of sale system, the new point of sale system, the retail management system, and ERP. And some of these other ones could come in at a later phase. And ultimately, we designed a scalable data warehouse for them. So on the left is their data sources, their point of sale system, their ERP, their retail system, and then Excel spreadsheets. And then pulling that in with the technology that they're already using. So they were already using Microsoft Azure. And so we wanted to make sure that we're using technology that they were already up to speed on. That was going to be easy to support. We built a Snowflake data warehouse in Azure, used dbt, and then right now they're in a mix of Power BI and Tableau because they have the historical reports on Tableau. But ultimately, they were looking to move to Power BI. That technology doesn't necessarily make sense, but they were thinking about it from a cost perspective. They wanted to roll this out to more people within the organization. If you're a nonprofit, generally there are discounts at a lot of these vendors. And so certainly take a look at what makes the most sense for your organization. And then there is always going to be Excel. It's still going to live there. People are still going to pull data out. That's always going to be a component of how this is in the future. So that's the data warehouse. And then solutions and benefits. So now they have faster reporting. They migrated off the system. They're saving money because now they kind of moved off this outdated system. They found some cost-effective tools. There's not as much wait time. You're empowering more users because you're getting the data in the hands, and then they can manipulate the data and the dashboards as they see fit. Wider adoptions, which we talked about, and just better reporting in general. And some of the big wins, we really started with retail and finance, and because that was the highest priority with the point of sale system. But now they're moving on to that board package. That's going to save one of their senior finance folks a lot of time from pulling all that information together in this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's still going to exist, but as opposed to pulling all that information from different point systems, putting it in Excel, then creating really nice dashboards in that, then now they can have that in a more automated way. So when they communicate with their board, it's going to be more of a dashboard. And they can go back in. And if they see trends that they're wondering about, you can always just double click into the dashboard and drill down on trying to understand why a KPI is what it is. So that's it at a high level. Nate, any questions, anything you think I didn't touch on you'd like to know more about?
Nope, I think that's great. And it's a great example of an organization looking to do more with data, more with their information. And, like you said, not starting from 0, starting at probably like 30 or 40 and trying to get to, 60 or 70 and hopefully eventually 100. So really great example. I know we're almost out of time here. And so we'll, there's another use case for take your time. I won't touch on this, but if you'd like to read through, this was another, based out of the Midwest social service organization that saw huge benefits from data. So if there's any questions before we sign off, I know we're close to time here. We appreciate everybody's time. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any.
Remember, everyone, if you have any questions, you can place your questions in the Q&A and we can get them answered for you.
Okay.
All right, we'll give them another minute to get some questions in there.
And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to either me or Sean or your if you're an Eide Bailly nonprofit Eide Bailly client, please feel free to reach out to your to the partner that works with you, and they could be happy to help answer questions or route those to us. We're always happy to help.